All right there, guys, and welcome back to 2024, a year in review. If you missed yesterday's video, you can just go to the next video on my channel, or you can just click the link in the description that'll take you straight to it. Now, before we get into July, there's a couple of things I want to talk about for the first half that I should have covered in yesterday's video but forgot. So we'll start off with those. So in March, I talked about the sad passing of Dragon Ball creator Akira Toriyama. One thing I forgot to mention in that was, you may have noticed, since about March, I started outroing my videos differently. I started saying the phrase, "until we meet again." The reason I started doing that is because it's a commonly used phrase to end off Dragon Ball series. Dragon Ball Super, of course, being the most recent to have that very phrase used at the end. And I thought it would be a nice way to do just a little tribute to Toriyama at the end of every video I make. So that's why I've been saying that phrase to end off my videos ever since around March time. And the other two things both come from June. So the first one is, if you remember me talking about in last year's year in review, where I went to see a mental health practitioner because I wasn't doing so well up here, I'd been seeing him from March of last year up until June of this year. June is when I stopped seeing him for a couple of reasons. Number one, I'd actually started feeling quite a bit better mentally, so the sessions weren't as necessary for me anymore. And two, the general area he was doing his practice in, he'd stopped doing it there. He'd moved to a different area and someone else would be doing the area that I was seeing him in. And I didn't want to go and see a new person because that person doesn't know me, doesn't know like the story of the last 1 year and 3 months, hasn't seen the diary entries that I'd wrote down between sessions. Like, it would just be all in one go, and that doesn't give the story fully. There will be things on the system, but that's not the same as seeing me all those times and going through the diary entries at different times rather than all at once. So that's why I decided to stop going to those. And the third and final thing that we need to cover is, when I was talking about the Dark Moon Comics Festival, which was the very last thing we spoke about in yesterday's video, I forgot to mention a very important detail. And that detail being, Ash actually made a video covering this very event on her channel, and that will also be linked in the description of this video. It would have been in the last video if I'd have remembered to mention that, but I didn't, so it'll be mentioned. It'll be in the description of this video as well, along with yesterday's video. Okay, now we've covered the rest of the things I wanted to do for the first half of the year. Let us get into the second half of the year with July. So July is actually the biggest month we have in terms of topics. We've got like 4 or 5 topics. So the first one being, I got another job interview. If you might remember in last year's year in review video, I talked about getting a job interview in October of last year, the very next day after I watched the Five Nights at Freddy's movie with Che. And the interview, in my opinion, for that job interview actually went really, really well. I felt like it had gone like, it's the best interview I'd done. And it was only the third interview I'd done. So it's not like I had much to choose from, but this is the interview I felt I did the best in. But nothing came of it. So at the very start of July, I got another job interview and went in, did the interview and came out and thought, wow, that went terribly. I didn't think it went well at all. I thought, yeah, there's no chance I'm getting that. But I was then told to come in for another one for another interview at the same place the following week. So I thought, how the hell has this happened? So clearly something's gone well, even though I definitely did not think it did. And when I went for the second interview, I was basically told that I'd actually been hired by this place. And that I'd be starting work in about 3 to 4 weeks, because the place hadn't actually opened yet where I was going to be working. So I'd actually been hired, which I couldn't believe at the time. I thought that I did not expect to be hired based on an interview that I thought went terribly. But that's what had ended up happening. And while all of that was going on, there was the very small little event that took place in the middle of all that, called the UK general election. You know, just a small thing. Yeah, that's right. After Rishi Sunak in May of this year called a shocked summer general election. Oh, and disclaimer, there's going to be plenty of political talk in this video. There wasn't that much in the last one, just the announcement of the election. There's going to be a lot more in this one. Just giving you the heads up now. So, the election happened, and all the predictions were saying it would be a landslide victory for the Labour Party. The election came and went on the 4th of July, American Independence Day. We couldn't even let the Americans have that this year. We had to spoil it by doing something of our own. And the Labour Party did indeed win by a pretty comfortable margin. Now, two things can be true at once. Were the Labour Party basically guaranteed victory in this election? Yes. But would the Labour Party winning this election also be an absolute disaster for the country? Yes. Both of those things can be true. The only reason the Labour Party won the election is because people had gotten tired of the Tories, and the fact that the Tories had essentially become a left-wing party themselves over the past 14 years. And I saw on a news channel an interview where this guy basically says there's a reason why the Labour Party have not been in power for so long. And over the past, it was 4 months at the time, they've been in power for nearly 6 months now. In 6 months, literally next week, they'll have been in power. And it's safe to say they have been terrible. Like, most people should just be able to see that. The Labour Party have been absolutely atrocious. And they've shown us exactly why they've spent the last 14 years out of power. Because you've got to think, if the Tories were so bad over the past 14 years, which they were, that I've just said, they essentially became a left-wing party, which is not what they're supposed to be. But if they're so bad, why did they keep winning elections and staying in power then? If the Labour Party was so much better, why did they never manage to get into power until this year? Because no matter how bad the Conservatives are, Labour will always be worse. The Labour Party will just indefinitely be so much worse. You could say that the Tories and Labour are basically the same, and there is some truth to that. But overall, Labour are always going to be worse than the Conservatives. I mean, a few things Labour have done since they entered power was start freezing the pensioners, destroying the farming industry, releasing actual criminals from prisons to house people who post memes on social media and dare to tell the truth about sensitive issues, and the biggest tax hike in history. And yet they're still claiming to be the party of the working class. not even in the slightest are they anything close to that anymore. Sure, once upon a time they were that, but they haven't been that for, at the very least, the last 5 years. Ever since the last election in 2019, that's when they decided to truly abandon the working class. So yeah, the election was won by Labour. Most people who, of course, did not vote for the Labour Party could see that it would be a disaster for the country, and it has been. And yet, despite that, as I've always said in these videos, whenever there's been an election, whether it's ours or America's, I've always said, I will never ever try to convince any of you who you should vote for. You should always vote for who you think is the best candidate for the leader. You should always vote for who you think is the best. And voters of all parties are very much welcome on this channel, since the only time we ever talk about politics is literally these videos, the year in review. That's it. We don't talk about politics at any other point of the year. Sometimes we don't talk about it at all at any point of the year. So whether you voted for Labour in the election, the Conservatives, Reform, the Lib Dems, the Greens, or anyone else, you are all still welcome on this channel. I may not agree with you and think that who you voted for is terrible, but you are always still very much welcome on this channel. Because deciding that you don't want to, that someone simply thinking differently from you is enough of a reason to not even associate with them, is an extremely toxic and hateful mindset to have. Whether you agree with someone if you disagree with someone, it doesn't mean you have to hate them. Unfortunately, way too many people nowadays, especially in the West, do not understand that. Okay, now we've finally finished off the general election. Next up is just over a week after the election, the presidential campaigns in America started. And it was Donald Trump originally it was versus Joe Biden, but the Democrats decided to commit a coup on him to put in Kamala Harris. She wasn't voted to be the Democrat nominee for presidency. She was just put there. And they complained about January 6th on the Republicans trying to overthrow the Biden administration before it even started, yet the party that actually did overthrow Biden was his own. Quite funny, that. But on the 13th of July, Donald Trump was hosting one of his rallies, and he got shot. An attempted assassination on his life by some deranged left-wing lunatic who had been radicalized by the very Democrat Party and mainstream media that tells you that Trump is a threat to all these things when he just isn't, and he never was. So Trump just barely managed to avoid the bullet. The bullet basically grazed his ear, and if he hadn't have turned his head at the last split second that he did, he'd have died. And that would have broken. Civil war would have broken out in America, probably, if that happened. If Trump hadn't have turned his head at the exact specific split second that he did, America would have been in civil war. But Trump got straight back up after getting shot and chanted the word "fight" to his supporters, which was a very badass image, probably the most badass image of the entire presidential campaign for either of them. And even people who have tried to wrong him so many times over the years, like Mark Zuckerberg, for example, even he thought that was a badass and an important, a strong image that works in Trump's favour. Because funnily enough, every time a president has had an attempted assassination on them, it actually makes them more popular, not less. It actually makes them more likely to win the next election. Because it worked for JFK before he actually got assassinated. It worked for Ronald Reagan, and now it's worked for Trump. So yeah, the same people that say Trump is a threat to all these things, they're the ones, their rhetoric, their hateful rhetoric, literally radicalizes people to try and actually murder him. And then they get upset when people say it's their rhetoric that is causing this. Yeah, you can't really call Trump the Austrian painter for 10 years straight and then act all surprised when your rhetoric causes someone to try and actually murder him. So yeah, that was pretty crazy. That was a pretty crazy event. On to something a little less crazy. Euro 2024. Of course, I talked about the last Euros in my 2021 year in review, if you remember, where England lost on penalties in the final to Italy. So this time around, this was it for Gareth Southgate. Win the Euros or leave your position as England manager. That was basically the ultimatum he was giving us himself. Win the Euros to stay on, don't win it, leave. So England were put in a group with Serbia, Denmark and Slovenia. England won their opening game against Serbia 1-0 thanks to a Jude Bellingham header. Then they drew 1-1 with Denmark and then an absolutely abysmal 0-0 draw with Slovenia. But England went through on 5 points, being the only team in their group to win a game. The other 3 teams in England's group did not win a game. Serbia lost their game to England and then drew with the other 2, and then the other 2 drew all 3 of their games each. Then we got into the round of 16 where England last time in the last Euros faced off against Germany, which was going to be a very difficult game. This time round they faced off against Slovakia and it should have been a fairly easy round of 16 win for England. But of course it wasn't. So Slovakia go 1-0 up in the first half, and it looks like they're going to pull off a shock and actually knock England out of the Euros at the very first knockout round. Until in the 95th minute, the 5th minute of stoppage time, Jude Bellingham scores an overhead kick to rescue the game for England. And then just 2 minutes into extra time, Harry Kane scores the winner and England move on to the quarterfinals. In the quarterfinals, they faced off against Switzerland, who they last played in the Nations League third place playoff in 2019 and beat them on penalties. The game ended up finishing 1-1 with Bukayo Saka scoring England's goal. Now, if you remember to the last Euros, Rashford, Sancho and Saka all missed penalties against Italy, which cost England the Euros final, and they received a substantial amount of racial abuse, mostly from people coming from the Middle East, and yet the sports media of this country continue to lie about who was actually sending those horrific messages because they want to have a certain image of football fans in this country, and they will lie about them as much as possible to get them the image and narrative that they want. That was worth mentioning, that it was most people who were giving Rashford, Sancho and Saka the racial abuse were not actually from here. It was from places in the Middle East mostly. And yet our sports media continue to this day to lie about that, so they can fit their narrative and image of what they want the football fans' reputation in this country to be. So we got to penalty, and this game also went to penalties. Rashford and Sancho weren't even at this Euros because of how bad they'd been over the past season. Saka was the only one out of the 3 who remained who also came to this Euros. He took a penalty in this shootout And unlike in the last Euros where he missed, because he had never taken a professional penalty in his whole career, but until that point, that was the first professional penalty he ever took. He'd taken plenty of penalties for Arsenal since the last Euros, scored all but like 2 or 3 of them, and scored his penalty this time round. And England, just like in 2019 in the Nations League third place playoff, won the shootout and moved on to the semi-finals, which is where they faced the Netherlands. The Netherlands had been a bit of a dark horse in this Euros because they didn't actually qualify for the last Euros. Or was it the World Cup? I know there's some tournament they've failed to qualify for like one of the last 3 tournaments. I always forget which one. Was it the last World Cup? Was it the last year? I think it might have been the last World Cup they failed to reach. I can't remember. So in the semis, Xavi Simons puts the Netherlands 1-0 up very early on. England get an equaliser, and then in the 90th minute, Cole Palmer plays the ball to Ollie Watkins, which these two were playing their first international tournaments ever of their whole careers. Watkins spins his man, takes the shot, and scores in the 90th minute to win the game for England and take them to the final, where they would face the 2008 and 2012 Euros winners, Spain. When Spain won the Euros back-to-back in 2008 and 2012, they had some of the greatest players we've ever seen. Xavi, Iniesta, Sergio Busquets, you know what I mean. They had some of the greatest players of the game has ever seen. And it was a pretty tense first half, finishing 0-0. Then in just 2 minutes into the second half, Nico Williams, brother of Inaki Williams, who has that really like long-running record for like he's gone tons upon tons of seasons for Athletic Bilbao without missing a game. He's that guy's younger brother, and he put Spain 1-0 up just 2 minutes into the second half. Then with 17 minutes to go, we haven't got there yet. Cole Palmer, in his first ever tournament, scores his first ever international tournament goal for England, making it 1-1. Only for in the 85th minute, Mikel Oyarzabal who came off the bench for Rodri at half-time, scores in the 85th minute winner, and Spain clinched their 3rd Euros title 12 years after their last one, and England suffer back-to-back defeats in Euros finals, and Gareth Southgate did then leave the England manager's post. Some would say he should have left it so long ago. I agree, he should have left it after the last World Cup, never mind this Euros. But he's gone now, and now we have Thomas Tuchel in charge, which is so much better. Okay, now we've got the Euros done. We have just one more thing for July, and that was I went to go see Deadpool and Wolverine with Che and Connor. This is the first time the 3 of us had all hung out together since April 2022 when we went to go see the second Sonic movie together. We hadn't all been together at the same time since then, and it was also the first time I'd seen Connor since then. And as always with us 3, it's like we were never even away. I of course covered the Deadpool and Wolverine here on the channel, and that day also actually lost me a friend, because originally I'd been planning to go see the movie with a different friend who is very much into Deadpool like me. But those two just asked me first, and I hadn't seen Connor in over 2 years, so I decided, yeah, why not? The other friend was quite disappointed with the fact that I'd done that, and I can understand why he'd be like that, because we had been talking about this ever since Deadpool and Wolverine was announced that we were going to go see it together, and then I went with someone else. But I'd actually been thinking of ending my friendship with this person like about 3 weeks earlier than when this happened, because I'd just gotten tired of him basically questioning everything that I did. If I hung, like, anytime I'd hang out with someone who isn't him, he'd always be questioning it. And not in a curious, oh, what did you get up to? Not in a curious way, more of in a, how come you didn't invite me? How come you didn't do said things with me? It was more of like in that way, and I'd just gotten a bit tired of it. And our friendship over the past 4 years had been quite rocky, to say the least. We'd fallen out a couple of times before this, since the end of 2020, and I just didn't feel we'd ever get back to the pre-end of 2020 friendship that we had. So we decided that it was just best for both of us to end the friendship fully and not go back to it. I hope he's doing okay and is enjoying himself in life. But yeah, I think it was best for both of us to just end the friendship and go our separate ways, and that's what we did. Wow, we've only covered 1 month of the year for the second half of the video, and we're almost half an hour in. I knew this video would have to be split up into 2 parts. So, now we move on to August. So in August, I started my very, very first day of work. And it was all relatively new to me. This was the first time I'd ever had a job. Something that I thought would take me forever to get. If you go back to my life in UK lockdown vlogs from 2021, I complain about not being able to find a job quite a lot in those very specific videos. So who'd have thought that just 3 years later, when I made those videos, I'd actually have a job, and I can't believe I managed this happen. And I'm ever so grateful that this happened, because I get to actually experience the world of work and feel like I'm contributing to society. I'd spent so long trying to get a job, and then finally I'd finally got one. Next up, for August, the only other thing we have is the Paris 2024 Olympics. So, the Olympics normally has the USA and China always battling it out for the number 1 spot to win the Summer Olympics. It was no different this time round, as it was the USA who came out on top this time. Normally China are the ones who come out on top in the Olympics, but it was actually the USA who took that number 1 spot. It's funny because both the USA and China finished on the exact same amount of medals. The only reason the USA took the victory was because they won more gold medals than China. And Team GB, which represents where I'm from, they normally finish 4th. That's the usual finishing position for Team GB in Summer Olympics. I'm pretty sure that's where they finished in Tokyo in 2021 and in Rio in 2016. But this time round, they came 7th. A really, really disappointing Olympics campaign for Team GB. They picked up the 3rd most amount of medals, but the countries that finished above them, which were Japan and Australia, are another 2, as well as America and China that finished above them. The countries that finished 3rd, 4th, 5th and 6th all picked up less medals than Team GB, but they all picked up more gold medals than Team GB, which is how they managed to get up to the positions they did ahead of Team GB. Breakdancing was the brand new event that had been added to this Olympics, and it was an absolute travesty. It was so terrible. Breakdancing is not a sport. How it got approved to be in the Olympics is mental, but I don't think it's coming back for the 2028 Los Angeles Olympics, and good riddance to it because it's a waste of time. So that's all we have for August. On to September. The only thing for September we have is a second assassination attempt on Donald Trump's life. This time at one of his golf courses. Luckily, he never was in immediate danger the way he was at the first assassination attempt at his rally. He wasn't in immediate danger this time round, and the Secret Service did indeed find the person that tried it the second time. They took out the first person at his rally that did it, and they made sure that they arrested and stopped the person in the second one. And it's like, again, your rhetoric, the rhetoric coming from the left, radicalizes people into doing stupid things like this. Saying Trump is a threat to democracy is a gigantic lie, but there are people stupid enough to believe it and brainwashed enough to believe it, like these two people who were then radicalized into actually trying to murder him. But luckily, Trump suffered no injuries this time and was relatively safe compared to the first attempt. October. So in October, the only thing we have is that me and Ash went to go watch My Hero Academia You're Next, the fourth and probably final My Hero Academia movie that there'll ever be, with season 8 of the show, aka the final season, beginning next year. If it was the final movie of the series, they definitely saved the best to last. And I covered the movie here on the channel back in October, and Ash also covered this movie on her channel as well. So yeah, that was the last movie I went to go see at the cinema, and she actually went in cosplay as well. She went as Izuku. We were thinking that maybe there'd be other people cosplaying, because when we went to go watch the Spy Family movie back in April, there were a couple of people cosplaying. Some as Lloyd and some as Anya. There wasn't anyone cosplaying as Yor, which was a bit disappointing. But yeah, for my Hero You're Next, Ash was the only person cosplaying. No one else. Just her. Now on to November. Just last month. So in November, I did something I really, really did not want to do. And that was move house. You may have noticed the background of this video and my last two videos has been significantly different to the background of pretty much all of my other videos for the last few years. That is because I moved house. I really did not want to move house. I was really damn against doing this, but I didn't exactly have much of a choice. So, and it's not been enjoyable. It's been tough to get used to. It's been such a massive change, because the place I was living at, I'd basically lived there almost my entire life. Like, it wasn't the first house I ever lived in, but it's the only house I have any sort of memories from. the very first house I lived in when I was born, I don't remember anything about that place. The only things I've seen of it are photos of me as a baby in that house. Whereas the house I just moved from, all of my memories are from times where I've lived in that house. I did not want to move. And I've not been enjoying... Life has not been enjoyable for the past 2 months since I moved. It's really, really not been enjoyable. And I've just not had... I'm just not enjoying life at the moment because of this. But we have something else for November, and that is Donald Trump's election victory. On the 5th of November 2024, the US presidential election took place. I find it funny that the UK general election took place on American Independence Day, something that only gets celebrated in America, and the American presidential election took place on a day that only gets celebrated over here, Bonfire Night. I thought that was quite funny that we held our election on one of their special events of the year that only they celebrate, and they had their election on the day of an event that only we celebrate. So Donald Trump was, before the election, leading up to it, was projected to win by a pretty substantial amount, but you had Kamala Harris supporters and herself believing that they could pull it out and win, and they didn't. Trump won, and the Democrats, one of their big arguments for this election was that democracy was on the ballot. Like, if they lost, democracy was over. And the thing is, democracy was actually on the ballot. They weren't lying about that. Just the one part they didn't understand was that the only way to save democracy was for them to lose. Was for the left to lose. And thank God it did. Donald Trump won the election, and democracy, at least for the next 4 years in America, is saved. I mean, Trump wouldn't even needed to have been part of this election campaign if the Democrats didn't steal the 2020 election, because there's no way in hell Biden won that election. Let's just be honest. There's no way in hell Biden won the election in 2020. It was stolen. There's so much evidence that's come out in the past 4 years that to suggest that very thing happened. Whereas this time round, in this election, there was no election stealing. So would you look at that? The Democrats don't steal the election, they don't win it. One thing I will give Kamala Harris, though, is that she was quite gracious in defeat when the results came out, and that she knew she was going to lose, and which is more than what Hillary Clinton acted like in 2016 when she lost the election to Trump. In fact, as far on as 2019, she was still saying that the election was rigged and stolen, that Trump wasn't a legitimate president. And then they went and literally stole the election in 2020 to give an actual illegitimate president and steal it from Trump. So he took it back. And fun fact, Donald Trump is only the second president in American history, and the first one in over 100 years, to serve 2 terms separate from each other. So, like, not one directly after the other. Serve a term, then don't serve the next one, someone else does, and then serve the one after that. Yeah, only the second president in American history to serve 2 terms, not back to back. So yeah, it was, thank God Trump won the election. America needed Trump to win the election. The whole world needed Trump to win the election, because some of the wars that are going on around the world, if anyone can stop them, it's him. He's like the only person that can truly stop some of the conflicts going on around the world. And that concludes November. All we have left is December. And that is going to be on... Funnily enough, the two things I have for December actually happened on the very same day. So, the Notre Dame Cathedral opened its doors for the first time in 5 years. You might think that's quite a random thing to come up... Quite a random thing to mention, and it probably is. But if you remember at the end of my 2020 year in review, I ended off that video with the final thing I talked about being those strange monolith structures that started appearing all over the world. That was just something random to talk about. And this also works, but I actually do have a reason to talk about this. So the Notre Dame Cathedral that's in Paris was burnt down in 2019. A devastating fire caused so much damage to the cathedral, and there was worry that it would never be able to be rebuilt to its former glory. And one of the things that was used in order to rebuild it was Assassin's Creed Unity, because that game is of course set in Paris, and there is a full-scale Notre Dame Cathedral in that game. The cathedral is in there at full scale. So that was actually used along with other things to rebuild the cathedral. So AC Unity may not be a great game, and it was riddled with bugs when it came out. And it was the very first AC game to be a PS4 and Xbox One only game, where it wasn't on the previous generation of consoles, just on the new current ones. And if Ubisoft never made AC Unity, the Notre Dame might have never been able to be rebuilt. It still might have, but maybe it wouldn't without Unity, who knows. So Ubisoft making Unity was indeed a good thing. And the final thing to talk about for 2024, a year in review, is going to the my local Christmas markets with Ash. Yeah, so I've never been to any Christmas markets before, so I decided to so me and Ash decided to go and check out our local one together. And the actual market itself wasn't particularly too great. But despite that, I had a wonderful time with her. And it was something I needed. It was something that I needed. With how bad the past 2 months have been, being able to hanging out with her for a good number of hours is something I really needed, and I'm very glad that I did that. The two of us had a wonderful time together, as we always do. And that concludes 2024, a year in review. So, to round off the year, there's a couple of other things I want to talk about. Number one, I like to do a mental health check at the end of every year, and I've done this since 2022. At the end of 2022, I told you guys that I was not feeling great up here. The worst I'd felt since 2019. I hadn't been feeling as bad as 2019, but it's the worst I'd felt since then. Then in 2023, I talked about how I was feeling a lot better mentally than I had the previous year. And this year has been a mixture of both. From January 1st up to Halloween, I'd been feeling fairly good mentally up here. But since Halloween, i.e. when I moved house, I've not been feeling good mentally here. Like, I have been so mentally drained by having to live somewhere I didn't want to move to and somewhere I don't like. And with such a big change. And you may have also noticed that from November onwards, you might have noticed that I'd only been uploading one video every 2 weeks. The reason for that is, for 2024, I wanted to wind down the year a little bit slower in terms of uploads, as I'm going to have such little privacy where I live now, that actually being able to I know for a fact I will not be able to make videos weekly. I won't be able to post one video every single week. So I don't know how often I'll get to make content, but I'll try as much as I can for you guys, because I still want to make videos. It just has become increasingly more difficult. So yeah, that's why I decided for the past 2 months, last month and this month, why I've been uploading bi-weekly, because I wanted to just wind down the year a little bit slower. And because I was moving house, I didn't know when I'd have Wi-Fi and all that, so I made sure to just schedule a ton of videos schedule a bunch of videos beforehand to make sure I had content for you guys, whilst if I wasn't able to make any more at the time. So the last thing I want to do is I want to thank Shay for always being an incredible friend. I want to thank Connor for the same reason, and I absolutely want to thank Ash for being a bright spark for me this year, which is funny because I described her as the very same thing all the way back in 2019. For being like a bright spark for me, especially this month when we went to go to the Christmas markets together. Hanging out with her is something I really needed, and it's done me so much good mentally when I've been with her. Because when we went to go watch My Hero You're Next, it was only a couple of weeks before I moved. I'm so glad to have her as a friend, along with all my other friends. So that will do it for 2024, a year in review. Thank you so much for watching this video, yesterday's video, and any other content you have watched over the years. And oh, wait, one more thing. I have one more thing to talk about. In my February anniversary video, my 7-year anniversary video I made back in February, I set a goal for this channel to reach 30,000 total views. And if we hit that, maybe 35,000 total views. So we actually did achieve the 30,000 total views for the channel goal this year. I'm recording this quite a couple of weeks before the end of the year, but I don't think we're going to hit the 35,000 total views mark. But thank you so much for helping the channel reach 30,000 views. It's very much appreciated. Now that is the end of the video. Thank you for watching this video, yesterday's, and any other content you've watched that I've posted over the course of this year. If you have enjoyed, please be sure to leave a like, subscribe if you are new to the channel, and I will see you guys back here in 2025, but until we meet again, goodbye for now.